Millions of Americans are now about to lose their unemployment benefits as progress halts in the second COVID relief bill. Congress has been working on this bill for months, and after weeks of deliberations, it looked like the American people were going to get some relief, paltry, but it was $600 in one-time payments plus some extended unemployment benefits after months spent enduring hunger, joblessness, and struggle, watching their lives hang in the balance, wondering if they would get any help at all. Lawmakers in Washington had agreed upon a jam-packed bill that not only included the paltry $600 in COVID relief, but also hundreds of other provisions, because it also is the bill that keeps the government funded, making the bill the largest one of the year at about 5,600 pages long. It's actually possibly the longest bill ever. Despite the obvious disappointment over the $600 sum, those checks were expected to be mailed out quickly and received by people as early as next week. That's now not going to happen. President Trump had other ideas. Last week, then again on Friday, the president doubled back on his own party and even his own provisions to the bill, calling instead for an increase in stimulus checks. An increase would be great. And the Democrats quickly jumped on board, but once again the bill hit roadblocks. Getting more money to people who have spent months in unemployment is critical. Getting money to small business owners, employers, and companies is critical. Making sure Americans don't face a lapse in benefits should be the #1 priority of lawmakers. However, now, with no agreement in the middle of the holiday season, the renegotiation of a new bill is making it highly unlikely that the American people will see the relief that they need when they need it. Plus, with no bill, thousands of federal employees are now looking at a government shutdown that would send them home. Try to remember that last government shutdown and the effect that it had. Government workers did not have enough money to make it through a month without income. It's much worse now. This comes as big airliners, who faced a brutal year industry-wide, are beginning to rehire some 32,000 employees that had been furloughed in order to get an additional $15 billion in payroll support. With me now to discuss all of this is Sara Nelson. She's the president of the Association of Flight Attendants and a former Biden-Sanders Unity Economic Task Force co-chair. Sara, good to see you. It's kind of fascinating that you and I are still discussing this, because we've been discussing it for months and months and months. The unemployment aid, let's just talk about that for a second. The unemployment aid that people were getting, the federal extra benefit, is set to lapse this week for people who've been getting it. So never mind the $600. We're actually going to lose this unemployment amount today.
Ali, today is, we celebrate Kwanzaa and Boxing Day, and both of these holidays are about our communities and our shared economic responsibility together, so it couldn't be a better day to talk about this. We have 12 million people who are falling off of any kind of unemployment aid today. We have 30 to 40 million people who are at risk of losing their homes by the end of the month. We have a government shutdown that is going to start on Monday if we don't get this bill signed. And we're talking about millions of people who do that government work. I want to remind people what that is. That's people who cut Social Security checks and get housing aid to our seniors so that they don't fall out of their homes. This economic package, the president understands that if he doesn't sign it, there's nothing this Congress can do. This legislation will die. This is not about $2,000 checks versus $600 checks. This is about whether or not we're going to have a functioning government. This is about whether or not we're going to get aid to people when we have 17 million children in this country going hungry. And we are on the knife's edge here. If we don't get this done now, we're talking about weeks and weeks at a minimum of getting any aid to people. The people that I represent are looking forward to coming back to work. They are going to lose any sort of assistance from the government, from the airlines on their health care. So we're talking about over 100,000 people who have been going without a paycheck and now will have no health care as well. We are talking about total economic disaster here and a complete breakdown of our government. It is not about $2,000 versus $600. It is about whether or not this week $600 checks are going to go out to each person in a household. For those families that are starving right now, that's $2,400 that they are not getting. That's what this is about.
You've got a lot of books behind you, but you've got one facing forward. It's The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. And the reason I bring that up is because it was October 1st that the House passed its version of this bill that finally got past the Senate. And Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell had said, I've got a bunch of Republicans who won't go for this because of the effect that giving more than $600 will have on the deficit. They're very, very worried about increasing the deficit on the backs of Americans who've lost their jobs or lost their incomes through no fault of their own. But there was no deficit problem with giving people who didn't need it tax cuts, which was the largest increase in the deficit that we have seen. So I don't understand why everybody suddenly got religion about the deficit when it came to poor people who or working people who lost their income.
Well, this is what we've seen for decades, and this has been fixed into Americans' mind that the deficit is a problem, and it's not a problem for, as you said, when we want to give massive tax cuts to the rich. It's never a problem then. But I have seen this horror show before. We saw this horror show in August when people were going to be losing their $600 plus up on those checks and be able to live and support other jobs. And the president blew up those negotiations then by saying he was going to sign executive orders and help Americans. What he really did was stop those $600 checks from continuing and all the other aid that was necessary. We saw it again in October when the House passed that bill and negotiations were moving along. And on October 6th, by tweet, while his negotiators were at the table, the president blew up those negotiations and said, negotiations are off. And 6 hours later said he only wanted to help the airlines and small businesses. When really what that did was it called out the dogs and had us divided among ourselves and fighting with each other over this piece of pie that, you know, the government can make as many pies as we want. But what he's trying to do is keep us divided, confused, and fighting with each other instead of locking in this emergency aid and having enough strength to fight for more. Because we have to help people understand the deficit myth, but that's not going to happen between now and New Year's when financial calamity is going to happen for regular Americans.
Well, let's make a promise that once this is over, we do spend some time having that conversation about let people understand what deficits are good for and what they're bad for and how much is good and how much is bad and when you actually employ them like times like this when we are facing economic calamity. Sarah, always...
Ali,
sorry, go ahead.
From the woman who called for a general strike and helped to end the federal shutdown, I'm calling on all Americans to come together right now and tell the president to sign the bill. That is what has to happen. Forget the malarkey, forget the confusion, the division, and we need to have him sign this bill so that we can fight for what we really need in the new year.
Well said. Thank you. Sara Nelson is the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, and she was the co-chair of the Biden-Sanders Unity Economic Task Force. Thank you, Sarah, as always.